A reading this morning from Matthew's Gospel, the 23rd chapter. Listen now, friends, for the word of the Lord. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it. But do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on the shoulders of others. But they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have the place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted." This is the word of the Lord. I have to start today. I have to begin today by telling you how much I love the church. I love the church. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, and in particular, I love this church. I do. I believe in it, or I wouldn't be here. What I say today is not a critique or a criticism of this particular church, but to show some of the ways that I think we Christians in culture today, and in churches sometimes too, aren't best serving our purpose. And actually, I say these things today because I believe that this church is capable of observing these things and doing much about it, being a little different. Many of our churches are not safe. Have you noticed? This can be a safe church. In many ways it is. I love hearing people say, "I didn't know that church could be like this." I've heard people say that about this church. Isn't that awesome? I want to hear it more, don't you? I didn't know that church could be like this. In many ways, we are that church, and we can be even more so. So here goes. Seek. We've been talking about seeking for the last several weeks. First week of the year, we discussed what we might be seeking in 2016 and beyond. The following week, we talked about what Jesus was seeking, what God was seeking in sending the Son to us to become human. And then last week, we talked about what people out there are seeking, people outside the walls of the church, people who maybe haven't been in church in a long time or go from church to church and they're not sure, but they haven't found it yet. They're seeking. And we said that it's hard to generalize, but there are a few things that most people are looking for, and we said they were 3 Ps, right? Personal growth, people, and purpose. People want to grow, they want to connect and build real relationships with each other, and they want meaning. They want purpose, something they're here to do, right? So today we're going to be talking about what people are not seeking, and how oftentimes that may be what churches or Christians are offering. We begin with a parable. This is one you probably haven't heard before. It's not in the Bible. It's called the parable of the LifeSaving station. And it goes like this. On a dangerous seacoast where shipwrecks often occur, there was once a crude little life-saving station. The building was just a hut, and there was only one boat, but the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea, and with no thought for themselves went out day and night tirelessly searching for the lost. Many lives were saved by this wonderful little station, so that it became famous. Some of those who were saved and various others in the community wanted to become associated with the station and give of their time and money and effort to support its work. New boats were bought and new crews trained. The little life-saving station grew. Some of the members of the life-saving station were unhappy that the building was so crude and poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided as the first refuge of those saved from the sea. So they replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture in the enlarged building. Now the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members, and they decorated it beautifully and furnished it exquisitely because they used it as a sort of club. Fewer members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do this work. The life-saving motif still prevailed in this club's decoration, and there was a liturgical lifeboat in the room where the club initiations were held. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, half-drowned people. They were dirty and sick, and some of them had black skin, and some of them had yellow skin. The beautiful new club was in chaos. So the property committee immediately had a shower house built outside the club where victims of shipwrecks could be cleaned up before coming inside. At the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities as being unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal social life of the club. Some members insisted upon life-saving as their primary purpose and pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station. But they were finally voted down and told that if they wanted to save the lives of the various kinds of people who were shipwrecked in those waters, they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast. And so they did. As the years went by, the new station experienced the same changes that had occurred in the old. It evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. History continued to repeat itself. And if you visit that sea coast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along the shore. Shipwrecks are frequent in those waters, but most of the people drown. Long parable, I know, but it illustrates the danger of church just with any institution, that when our habits or our patterns or our lives, we become interested in the self-preservation of our institution and forget the purpose of that institution. We become more interested perhaps in a club, and many churches can be that way, so that our purpose of seeking and saving the lost is forgotten. Evangelism in many churches today may be less about sharing Jesus and Christ's love and more about bringing folks in so that we can keep our doors open, pay the bills. My question would be to churches that have that approach: are we here to serve others, or are we here to get others in here to keep the place open? That is what's going on in many churches, whether we'll admit it or not. And people out there, they're not fooled. The numbers aren't encouraging for our mainline denominational churches these days. They're shrinking. People are still seeking, but they're not seeking in the places where they once did. Oftentimes we wonder why newer churches might be growing and more established traditional churches not. Sometimes the institution, those traditions that we have a hard time finding a new phase for, get in the way. What's going on? What are people seeking that so many churches are lacking? And what are people not seeking that so many churches are offering? Essentially, people need to be fed. They need to be fed, not fed upon. You laugh because you know the difference. The gospel should be life-giving, not life-taking, life-bleeding, life-draining. The parable of LifeSaving Station reminds us that when things become institutions, there's a danger there. There's nothing wrong with an institution per se. I'm not saying that. I love the church. But when church, for church's sake, gets in the way of the mission that Christ gave us, we need to think about that and notice that and do something about that. We need to feed the sheep, not feed upon the sheep. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Jesus was talking about the Pharisees today in our passage in Matthew, and he's talking to his believers, and he says, do what they tell you to do. They are religious authorities. They know the law. Do what they teach you to do, but don't do what they do. Why? Well, he says that they like to be seen doing these things. But also notice that, they're not always doing these things. He calls them hypocrites. And he says that they like to place heavy burdens on the people. Heavy burdens on the people. And then they don't do anything to help the people lift and carry them. They're feeding upon the sheep. Do you see that? And Jesus is upset about this, as he should be, as we should be. These Pharisees have turned the law into an institution that came before the people. Jesus would challenge them later, Sabbath for humans or humans for the Sabbath? He's asking that very question. What's more important, the institution or the people? When our programs or our committee structure or our politics or our past become more important to us than the people, we should notice that. When we're more interested in making people who come in the door fit in with what we do or who we are than making church a safe place for them to come in, we should notice that. This week, my wife went to the post office. I told you I was going to tell this story. She called me while I was writing my sermon to tell me this story, so I had to use it. She went to the post office. It was Thursday. Remember what happened Thursday night? Well, it started, we knew that bad weather, winter weather was coming. And if you don't know, we're from Florida. My wife was born and raised in Florida, third generation. Okay. So she went to the post office, and it was starting to rain, and we knew that sleet was coming, freezing rain was coming, snow was coming. And she's walking on the sidewalk out front, and it's crinkling under her feet, and it's grainy. She looks down, and there's some white stuff there. And she says, well, what is that? Is that sleet? Is that freezing rain? What is that, snow? She goes into the post office. She comes outside. There's somebody standing there, and she says, what is this on the ground? And the person said, it's salt. Selena says salt belongs in the ocean. That's a good Floridian response there. Do you see what people who aren't used to winter culture have to learn about winter culture? Do you recognize, too, what people who aren't familiar with church culture have to learn about church culture. We can't assume these days that people know what they're doing when they come to church. Because more and more people don't. They've been gone a long time, or maybe they've never been here. We have to welcome them as they are. People don't want to have to work hard to fit in. They live the rest of their life fitting in everywhere they go. It's hard work sometimes to fit in. People want to be loved as they are when they come to church. Now, when Jesus gets to them, they might change. We're all sanctified as we live out our life of faith. We become more and more the image of who God made us to be. I'm not saying God's going to leave everybody where they are. We do grow. But we start where we start. And people have to be welcome in church. Now that takes me to a second place. See, many churches have become a place of judgment. A place where there are people with hard hearts. There's a lot of conflict, some hypocrisy like Jesus was talking about. Seeing other people's sins worse than our own. And I will raise my hand. I've been guilty of all of those things. But in how many churches will the people not raise their hand? They not own that, not acknowledge, yes, I've been judgmental. I've exercised judgment. There's plenty of that going on in our churches. And all we have to see to recognize that is look at how Christians are depicted in popular culture today. So often we're depicted as a people of rules, a people of gatekeeping. Well, you fit in and you don't, and you're okay and you're not. Is that what Jesus taught us to do? I remember when I was in high school, this was 25 years ago, Church Lady was a popular skit on Saturday Night Live. Dana Carvey would come on and judgmentally talk about things going on in popular culture or politics. That was the perception of people in church. Is that what we want people to think about us? As I said, people have to fit in wherever they go. There are cultural perceptions about what we look like, what we smell like, how we talk, how we dress. There are cultural perceptions about what we eat and where it comes from. There are expectations about how we raise our children, the cars that we drive, the houses we live in. Do people want to have to live up to our expectations when they come to church? Something to think about. And the last thing that I think often churches do to feed upon the sheep rather than to feed the sheep is that churches also have a perception of being out of touch or too simplistic. Now, last week we talked about how people want clarity in their lives. Life is confusing, it's messy, it's distracting, and we want to understand it. We want clarity. But there's a difference between clarity and simplicity. And life is not simple, is it? It's not simple. We want clarity, we want to understand it, but in our quest to understand life, we can't make it too simple. So simple that it doesn't hold up to life. And in some of our churches, and sometimes we too have done this, we make the gospel or theology or politics or our social codes so simple, so dogmatic, so rigid that they don't always hold up to the messiness of life. Now, I'm not talking about one issue in particular here, okay? I'm not pushing an agenda. I'm actually trying to do the opposite. I say every week that we're not perfect. We're not, and we don't have the answers, and we don't. But we are in relationship with the one who does have the answers. And the answers aren't a set code, a law, a recipe for invoking God's name in prayer. Those are too simple. It's a relationship with God that we can have through Jesus Christ. That's what we offer, and that's what we're seeking in so many levels. We are seekers, are we not? And as a church, this church, I believe, this church at its core wants to feed and not feed upon. We want to give life and not to drain it. I know this. I know the soul, if you will, of this congregation. And it's a feeding, nurturing soul. And I love that about it. We recognize that we don't have all the answers. Again, we just know the one who does. And so we're seeking. We are seekers, and we are inviting those out there who are looking for something more than what they've known in life, looking for answers, to come and seek with us. We don't have to expect others to come in and serve as it's always done. They might have their own ideas or their own needs that are different than what we've known in the past. And we don't have to judge or argue because we serve a God of love and mercy. Now, I know in some ways I've been jumping around a little bit about things that people don't want in church, and maybe I've sounded harsh. So just hear this. If you hear me say one thing today, hear me say this. People outside, people out there, and maybe some people in here too, I'm guessing, are hurting. They're confused. They're insecure. Maybe they have it all and they still feel hollow. Maybe they have nothing and they don't understand why. They're seeking a safe place to find those answers, to find help, a place to grow, to feel support and love, to get direction. Those 3 P's we talked about last week: growing, personal growth, people, purpose. They're looking for those things. They're not looking for the institutional ways that church has sometimes gotten in the way of those things. The good news is this church is perfectly equipped for people to come in and look with us, to seek with us. My experience is that in general, people aren't interested in propping up somebody else's institution these days. But they're attracted to the gospel. The gospel attracts people. And I'll tell you, people don't want to have to fit in these days, but they will follow when they feel loved with the love of Jesus Christ. We can be and have been that safe place. Now, this is the moment where I speak a word directly to the soul of this congregation, so listen. Some of the hard things that we've been through, and you know what I'm talking about. Some of those things, while I don't think they were God ordained, but they can be redeemed. They can give us a heart of compassion for those people who are seeking too. They can give us a heart to care for those people who have been hurt in a church before. Do you know how many people out there are like that? We can have a heart for that. We should have a heart for that. That's where we can go from here. That's where we can build from here. As one person said this week, we've been talking about seeking. We better have a place they can seek when they get here. It better be safe. We can be that place about which people say, I didn't know church could be like this. And so let's feed the people. Let's not feed upon the people. Let's seek together and invite those people out there who are seeking to. Amen.